so yeah, we'll see what's what. I believe so. I've got nothing to say.
Good evening, everybody. Welcome to tonight's Planning Control meeting. First of all, can I just ask you all either to put your phones on silent or switch them off, whichever one you think is appropriate. Thank you. Moving on to the agenda. Apologies. Do I have any?
I'll be needing to leave before the meeting ends, so my apologies for the end of the meeting.
Thank you. Anybody else? Right, okay. Late items to be introduced. There's none. Declarations of interest, anybody?
Yeah, Chair, committee voter item number 3. I know the family very well, so I will be moving on.
Well, that's coming up first, so you'll probably be better just waiting outside then. Minutes of the meeting held on the 12th of October. Thank you. Development Control Performance Quarter from July till September.
Nothing to add to the report, Chair, but happy to take any questions if members have any. Thank you.
Thank you, Ian. Moving on to item 6, which is applications to be considered tonight. Now, there is a slight order change here. We're taking Manor Road first, which is pages 67 to 74. And to tell us about this is Ian.
Not a great deal to add to the report, Chair. It's a house extension on the properties located on the south side of Manor Road. Has been amended during its life to accommodate some design changes to set back the side element. There's a slight reduction in the ridge height of the roof as well. Rear two-storey element partially being amended on its eastern side, and a flat-roofed single-storey extension projecting out 8 metres at its deepest point, but on a fairly substantial plot. So we have objections. The objectors' neighbours haven't appeared tonight to speak. They've had to forward apologies, but in line with policy, and so hence the recommendation. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Ian. We have Mr. Woodland to speak on this. First of all, can I apologise, it's Mr. Woolard. I wasn't wearing my glasses, so I'm very sorry about that.
That's okay.
Right, and you have 3 minutes.
Thank you, Chair, and good evening. Thank you, members of the committee. I'm Bob Woolard. I'm speaking as the planning agent for Mr. Raleigh and his family. On behalf of the Raleigh family, I'd like to thank you for this opportunity to speak and to endorse the positive recommendation of your professional officers. As the report in front of you notes, there's only really 2 issues for consideration: the character and the street scene and the impact on residential amenity. This Manor Road is a suburban estate layout. Clearly it has the capacity for an appropriate degree of change, personalisation and innovation. Policy is supportive of such changes. It's quite clear in this case that the proportions, the fenestration pattern, the style are entirely reflective of the existing house and that of its neighbours. The side extension subordinate to the main house, being half the width and with a lower ridge height. The house is set back from the road, and the proposed extension is set back from the front of the house to ensure it's visually recessive. So from views both up and down the street, the addition wouldn't appear dominant or out of proportion, and as has been pointed out, it's a large plot, so it couldn't be described as over-intensive or over-development of the site. In respect of the relationship to neighbouring properties, the additions have been very carefully designed to avoid any harmful impact on neighbouring property through either overlooking or overshadowing or an overbearing impact. In relation to the adjacent dwelling at number 8, Your officer's report notes the additions would not result in any loss of privacy or overshadowing, and our client accepts the recommended condition that the bathroom window should be obscure glazed and fixed. In relation to the neighbouring dwelling at number 12, again it's noted there are no adverse impacts arising from overshadowing of habitable areas, and any slight diminution of light to part of the side garden certainly couldn't be considered to be significant or unusual in this urban location. So while the neighbour concerns are understood, change also offers an opportunity for positive enhancement. And above all, at the heart of this application is an opportunity for the Raleigh family to address their personal circumstances and specifically to ensure their home meets their ongoing needs. Caring for an individual with a disability places significant additional burdens on family life. Additional adaptable accommodation will allow them to focus on supporting both of their children together, as well as providing the flexibility to move specialist medical equipment around as necessary. I think it's fair to say the words life-changing are sometimes overused, but in this case, this is an opportunity for planning to have a real positive, direct impact on family life. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Mr. Woolard. Councillor Ingle. Very good of you, Councillor Ingalls. Saved us having to listen to you for 3 minutes. Right. Moving back to the agenda now is item number 1. Oh, sorry. Sorry, would anybody want to speak, or shall we move it? Move to the vote? No? Thank you. All those in favour? Anybody against? Thank you. Right, now we can go back to item number 1, which is 20 to 22 Ashbourne Road, pages 1 to 31. It's coming.
Thank you, Chair. In terms of housekeeping items, updates for the report, there aren't any in this particular case. The application seeks full planning permission to redevelop this site for student accommodation with associated facilities. Members will recognise the application site as the former Samway cycle shop and its associated storage and workshop floor space that cover a large part of this site. The buildings are of very little architectural merit, and there are no objections to their demolition. The report is a comprehensive analysis of the application and addresses the policy tests that need to be considered given the site's position within the Friegate Conservation Area and the relationship to nearby listed buildings and residential properties. Members should note that this proposal has been informed by pre-application discussions and positive negotiations during the life of the application to address design and layout issues. The original pre-application offering for the site included quite a contemporary frontage building of modern form and materials, and this has been amended significantly to address concerns about its impact in this part of the conservation area. The agent has sought to address other design issues, and these include the layout of Block 4, which sits on the western site boundary, and the reduction of land levels across the majority of the rear part of the site by nearly a metre to lessen the impact of the overall scale of the development. The proposal does involve many positive components, and there are no objections from a design perspective from Conservation Advisory Committee, subject to the agreement of certain detail. Chair, there are objections from nearby residents, and these have been received, and speakers are here tonight to voice those concerns, issues about the overall nature and scale of the development, vehicle access, parking, general disturbance, etc. Members do have to be mindful, however, of the starting position. The site accommodates nearly 1,600 square metres of retail and associated floor space, and this could be occupied by a more intensive retailer, such as a small format food store. As mentioned, the existing buildings on site are of little architectural merit, and the existing large building at the rear of the site, which you can see on the photo, with a vaulted roof, stands very close to those properties on Markeaton Street, and looking at it today, it measures about 6 metres to eaves and about 8.5 metres to the top of the roof, so it's quite a visual presence and a severe impact on those properties on Markeaton Street. This would obviously be demolished to accommodate the development. The overall landscaping component of the site is to be welcomed, and the architect has incorporated elements such as green walls on Block 4, which is on the western boundary, to enhance the landscaping and biodiversity value of the site. Of course, this is a brownfield site, so there are substantive strategic benefits to consider. Its redevelopment is promoted in the local plan and by central government, and it would assist in providing new housing in a highly sustainable location close to the city centre. This will positively contribute to overall housing provision and reduce the pressure on greenfield sites in this ward and the city overall. Members, I do promote the recommendation, which has been robustly justified in a long report, and invite the speakers to the floor. I think it's Councillor Repton first, Chair. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Foote and Councillor Repton had a slight discussion just before the meeting, and Mr. Foote has agreed to let Councillor Repton speak first.
Thank you, Chair. Representing people in the immediate area, there are overwhelming opposition to this scheme. It will change the character of the area, which is a high residential family area. It's in the conservation area. We believe it's out of keeping. We believe that it would lead to increased vehicle problems, parking problems, nuisance problems, noise, loss of amenity for local people, and people being able to enjoy the rights that they have to enjoy their own properties. I think the very minimum that I would be wanting this evening is no pedestrian access from Markeaton Street. I'd be looking for no car parking provision on the site, apart from one disabled bay. I'd be looking for access for emergency only, bin collection and drop off for students once a year to drop off and once a year to pick up. I think that would be the absolute minimum that myself and local people would look for. Ideally, I'd urge councillors to reject the whole scheme, because that's what people in the area would want to actually see. But in terms of my own position, that's the minimum requirements that I think that I'd have. Ideally, I'd want you to reject it completely as being inappropriate for this area, because of the reasons I outlined, but the reasons that I've actually stated, hopefully the committee will agree and you'll make conditions to that effect. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Repton. That's the first time you've finished within the 3 minutes. Mr. Foote.
Hello. Yeah. Thank you, first of all, for allowing me to speak tonight. We've absorbed the objections that have been made throughout the consultation period, and also note the points that Councillor Repton's made earlier. We do feel we can alleviate some of the points raised, and my client is more than willing to work with the council and the adjacent residents to minimise these issues. This is not a cluster flat development aimed at first-year students, which would create more bedrooms generally. This is a luxury accommodation with 30 square metre self-contained rooms and a 24-hour concierge for residents and for security. Each self-contained studio is larger than the city's current standard accommodation due to the scheme being targeted to final year and master's students. It's not a fresher scheme. A concern has been raised regarding the access to Markeaton Street. Proposed use reduces the car movement along Mockheaton Street when compared to other potential uses, like office use, apartments or a convenience store, which would all need large parking areas which already exist on the site. The primary pedestrian access would be through Ashbourne Road, with the Mockheaton Street entrance only being used to allow emergency services and the weekly private bin collection. This refuse collection is completed by a private company that use small vans, not council-run lorries. We're also being used the entrance for residents to move in and out of the properties at the start and end of terms. This entrance will be gated and coded to ensure that residents cannot use this route on a daily basis. Basically, access is purely through Ashbourne Road. One of the objections also highlights the staircase overlooking 24 Ashbourne Road. This could be conditioned to be obscure glazing. It's a staircase and does not need a view, just daylight. Demolition has also been raised as a potential issue. Demolition and construction of the building has to comply with health and safety and the CDM regulations. Demolition, specifically the asbestos obviously on site, there's a lot of it, will be completed by a qualified and suitable company. One of the conditions, I note on the document put forward previously, is the CDM construction phase plan should be conditioned, so the method of removal of the asbestos, etc., can be agreed with the council officers prior to any commencement. This site needs to be redeveloped. Its current use and condition are not sustainable. The design has been thought through rigorously on pre-application process with the council's planning department, which has included the Conservation Area Advisory Committee, and they have raised no objections to the scheme. The proposal is suitable for the location, with 4 university sites being within walking distance, and it will be upgrading the street scene and the conservation area. I'll ask the committee to approve this, please.
Thank you, Mr. Foot. Well in
With
time.
conditions, as always.
Can we have Miss Saxon?
Hi, good evening. I live on Mockheaton Street, directly opposite the proposed entrance, number 32. But I also speak on behalf of some of my neighbours as well, further along the street. I'm not against redeveloping the site. I think it would be good to redevelop the site. However, I do object to the proposed development of it being for students. I know that the developer has just said they're going to be targeting final year and master's students. I'd be interested to know whether that would be a criteria for the people who move in there, whether they would only allow those students in or whether they are just targeting them and would take other students as well. So I'd be interested to know about that. But the street is a settled residential street. There's 127 houses or properties along that end of the street, and less than 10% are student lets. They're either owner occupied or rented, and rented by professionals, families, and there's residents who've lived on the streets for many years. For example, my neighbour who is in the Mock Tudor house right on the corner, which is number 35, she's lived there for over 15 years, and she bought her property on the basis that it was the only kind of traffic coming through was for the Samways shop, which it's a bike shop, so you didn't get many cars coming in and out anyway. So the change of use will obviously impact very heavily on her. And also, I know they've proposed that there'll be only emergency access through there. I would be concerned about the entranceway only being 4 metres, and the street is very heavily parked. I think it's good that they're saying there'll be no foot access for the students, but I'd be interested to know how that would be monitored and enforced, that would be a concern, because we do get a lot of students coming up and down the street using it as a cut-through late at night, being very noisy, singing, chanting, shouting on the way around and about. And also, there's lots of student developments currently being built. There's a recent one on Queen Street. They've converted the former council offices at the top of Friargate into luxury accommodation. They're building 2 blocks on Agard Street. Is there really a need for another one? Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Saxon. Mr. Foot, in a sort of break from normal accordance, are you able to sort of give some assurance that it will be the students that you said will be here, or will it be just anybody at the end?
Yeah, working, yeah. The initial approach to the design was looking at what's in Derby at the moment, and there's a lot of cluster flats, full stop. Lots of fresher stuff generally for kids leaving home for the first time. This isn't for that. It's large bedrooms. So I can't guarantee anything, obviously, but the bottom line is this is purely geared towards master's students and final year students and potentially foreign students. So they are large, self-contained units, kitchen, ensuite. They're 30 square metres. It's almost a bunk-bed flat sort of size. They are luxury, and it's got concierge for security who's 24/7. So rear access down to Market Street won't happen. It's all gated. It's all coded, so you can't physically get in the site. I haven't got the code. But we're talking to the planning officers earlier, or previously rather. We're very keen to get the footfall on Ashbourne Road, not on Market Street, just because that is the main route to the campus anyway. So Market Street, the opening's only there really for emergencies full stop, and that's it.
That's fine. Okay, thank you. Can we have Mrs. Darcy Webster?
Mm-hmm. You've got 3 minutes. Okay. Tell you when you've got 1 minute left. Good evening. I have lived in my existing property for 50 years, and I am opposite this opening. I object to the proposed access for anything. This is a very heavy populated street. Most houses have got 2 or 3 cars, and they're always double parked. Residents parking that we only have is 8 till 6. Monday to Friday. Weekends, there are students who are existing there now. We can't even get in our own street to park. If we have more students, they needn't try and kid us that these people would not come, because they do already. The access is very, very tight and very limited. Emergency vehicles would not be able to access it. Recently, there was a fire in a 3-storey one, which was the old manse, and people were trapped on the top floor. The fire engines really struggled to get down because of the cars. I did ask a fireman, what would you do if you had to get up over there? We'd bump the cars out. Where could they bump the cars to? There is nowhere left. We have to park there by choice. If they had the opening on Ashbourne Road, they could easily carry on the conservation theme. It is just got the one access that is from Mackworth Road, because it's a one-way street. So it would be up and down just the same exactly as it is now. I'm sorry about this, I've got Martin Repton's glasses on. And he's got cockeyed eyes, yeah. But there is definitely nowhere. We've got a turning circle at the bottom, and that's it. And at night, it's even parked up in there as well. And we rather feel, well, we don't feel very aggrieved. A lot of people would have been here tonight to support this. Had we known about the meeting, people only heard about it in the Telegraph. I personally didn't know what time the meeting was until Monday morning. And it doesn't seem fair. The construction traffic will struggle. Last time there was a major development in Markeaton Street, oblique the other end. We've got photos where the construction traffic couldn't even get down. They were just stuck for about an hour. The police had to come and try and get people to move the cars. Now, this is not right to residents of this area, whether they be students or private people. Thank you for listening to me.
Thank you.
Yes, thank you, Chair. I don't know how many members have been to the site, but the access from Markeaton Street currently serves the warehouse building that you can see in the photograph. There's a big roller shutter door there, and then you've got the large area to the side, on the sort of western side within the main body of the site, that accommodates a number of car parking spaces. So there is a capacity there presently if the existing building was to be reused for some fairly continuous heavy service activity in terms of vehicular movement. Now, you've had the assurances, Councillor Repton suggested something, and the agent's taken that on board, that the principal access for pedestrians will be through from Ashbourne Road. There is a concierge service. The details of that have also been commented on by the police liaison officer as to the adequacy of that. He's quite happy with it. We could deal with it by condition in terms of restrictions on that access for anything other than immediate servicing, but there will be the physical barrier as well as of a secure gate, so ensuring that's retained for the life of the development as well. In terms of the impact, well, it is, I appreciate that Markeaton Street is well parked. I was there only this morning and saw it for myself, and that wasn't at peak time, so it's there's lots of movement around there. Students, people walking into town and up to the Britannia Mill and other facilities, so there is some movement, but we do have to be mindful of the backstop position as to the reuse of this building for retail purposes. Lots of storage space at the back. The Lidl application we looked at in Chellaston covered something like 1,500 gross square meterage of floor space, and this is akin to that. I'm not suggesting at all that that would be the backstop position, but we have to be mindful of that. It's full demolition of the existing buildings on site and a positive enhancement of the Frygate frontage, Ashbourne Road frontage in the Frygate Conservation Area. We have accommodation in a very sustainable location. There has been negotiation through the life of the application with conservation officers, those currently at the council and those who've recently left, so that lots of activity in terms of understanding of the site, what the site needs, what the site could accommodate, what we would prefer the site to accommodate. And I think I do appreciate the concerns of neighbours, but we have to make a balanced choice here, and I think that choice is a reasonable one with the safeguards in place and those that have just been talked about, which we can address by condition. So with that in mind, Chair, I do promote the recommendation with the safeguards outlined during the debate. So happy to take any further questions, Chair. Thank you.
Thank you, Ian. Councillor Kerr first.
Thank you, Chair. I was interested to read it in the report that the big warehousey building at the back there started off as an ice rink. I didn't know that. But I imagine that if it became, you remember it, do you? A roller skate. Well, I can imagine that if that returned to that use, there would be a lot more toing and froing than there would be with the residential use that's been suggested. And I just think that is something that I'd bear in mind. But it is a change of use initially, and in many ways I think that it's easy to move buildings into residential at the moment because of the demand for housing. But in this location there has been a significant retail unit on the other side of Ashbourne Road, which has been standing empty and not being used for much for quite a long time. So I'm relaxed about the change of use to residential. I do, however, have a number of points that I don't think that where we are quite right on this in terms of living accommodation. In terms of the first one, and people who know me will not be surprised, that is the cycle parking. Now, I had presumed that the main access for cyclists to the cycle parking would be from the route from Markeaton Street. It's a significant cycle route. It's a safe cycle route. It's got the cycle gate at the right-hand end as we look at the plan. But if that gate is normally going to be locked, then cyclists getting to the cycle parking, which is towards the Ashbourne Road end of the site, have also got to negotiate a flight of steps and come through the building. And I don't think that's been thought through. And if we believe in alternatives to driving, then I think we need to be clear on what's happening on that. We need to not have steps getting to the cycle parking, or we need to make clear that the cycle access is through Markeaton Street. And I think that needs to be clarified. Walking is obviously also more pleasant along Markeaton Street than along Ashbourne Road. The air quality will be better. There is often queuing traffic on Ashbourne Road. For people who may have asthma or similar things, walking on Markeaton Street will be a more pleasant route if we're going to encourage people to travel sustainably. The landscaping, I think, I'm pleased there's a condition on landscaping, but the current layout that we have there, I think people will be cutting through the grassed areas. I don't think we've got the desire lines in the right place, and I think there needs to be a little bit more thought given to that. So I hope that there is flexibility in that condition that we've got there. There will also be visitors to this site, and I'd hope that they would come by cycle and or on foot rather than by car. And it's been pointed out that the car parking is very bad round there, so therefore where is the opportunity cycle parking rather than residential cycle parking? It could be on the front with cycle hoops on Ashbourne Road, but the safer cycle route again is Ashbourne Road. There's flat roofs there at the front, and there are lots of south-facing roofs. I would love to think that we could be improving the sustainable energy opportunity with PV opportunity on there. And I accept that the south-facing main roof is one facing part of the conservation area, and there is a challenge putting PVs on into conservation areas. But if it was PVs done as tiled PVs, then they would be sympathetic, certainly as sympathetic as the roof covering that is currently proposed, which I think is a metal one, which may be a bit warehousey. So I think that is something that at least we should be discussing. The south-facing and south-west-facing panels to the rear wouldn't be seen from the conservation area. Public areas of the conservation area, and I think we ought to be looking at that as well. And because of concern about the residents' parking area, I think it needs to be clear that people who are living in this area would not be eligible for residents' parking permits, which would exacerbate the parking on Markeaton Street. And I think that's it. Thank you, Chair. I hope someone's...
Thank you, Councillor Kerr. I thought we might finish the meeting off by the time you finish. Councillor Harwood.
Thank you, Chair. Follow that. We had Mrs. Darcy Webster make a comment that she only found out about it in the Telegraph and that a lot more people would have been against this had they have known about it. Can I have an assurance from the officers, please, that the required notices regarding this application were put out in the correct way, please?
Yes, I mean, the application was advertised, and I understand that, well, in terms of the publicity requirements for the application, it was all correctly done in terms of site notice, press advert and neighbour letters. In terms of the procedure for advertising the committee meeting, all the papers were online, and for people who had been invited to speak, my colleagues contact those people to let them know when the meeting is so that they can confirm or not that they will continue or still have the desire to speak. But we've done all the normal publicity for the application in terms of the planning application requirements and all the information that goes out on CMIS in terms of the necessary responsibilities under the provision of information a week before the meeting. I can double check on that for you tomorrow, but I'd need to speak to other colleagues to make sure that that's been the case, but to my knowledge, it's been done as we ordinarily do.
I accept that, Chair, but I must make the point that whilst it is put on CMIS, and I understand that, which I can, and most people can see, there are people that can't see CMIS or haven't got the facility to see CMIS. And on top of that, sorry?
They've got 3 councillors.
Yeah, okay, they've got 3 councillors that could go to them, but, and what have you. Do we no longer then take it that it's put on the lampposts in the vicinity of the application?
Yeah, we do various site notices, something like this, site notices on the 2 frontages, and then there's a press advert that we still have to do, even though it's a little anachronistic in terms of people don't really read them, but we still pay quite a bit of money to display them in the press, and then we notify individual neighbours also who bound the application site, so they get an individual letter.
So, Chair, there is no reason at all why Mr Darcy Webster and indeed the other residents in Markeaton Street could have not known about this application.
We can't speak on their behalf, Frank, but the fact of the matter is all the legal procedure was done. Notices were put up that were required to, press adverts, etc. So there's nothing more that we can say on their behalf or they can say on our behalf. Obviously, if there's any more clarification that you need, Mr Woodhead is quite pleased to see you tomorrow morning and go through it with you. Anybody else? Okay. Councillor Wood.
This is a residential area, as been pointed out. This is a residential application. The existing permission is for retail. If it stayed as retail, it would increase the amount of traffic in Markeaton Street and cause problems. It's been said that it's for students. Students are people. And as far as I'm concerned, we should not discriminate against any minority group of people, whether they're students, old people, people from another country, people who speak another language. It is quite wrong to discriminate in planning terms on those grounds. And to say that one person can go through a gate and another person who happens to be perhaps a mature student cannot go through that gate is not something that this planning committee should be dealing with. This is an excellent application. It's been negotiated a number of times to make it fit in with the conservation area. Yes, there is a problem of parking in Markeaton Street. There is now. That is because those houses were built at a time when people didn't have cars. They now do. If we banned parking down there, you would get more traffic up and down there. So in many ways, parking regulates the traffic and regulates the speed. It's not a totally bad thing. But my hackles do rise when I hear, oh, students will cause noise, students will do this, students will do that. That is prejudice. These are people. If they don't behave, that's a different matter. That's a police matter. It's not a matter for the planning authority. I think this is an excellent application and I support the recommendation.
Thank you, Robin. Anybody else? All those in favour of the recommendation?
I raised a number of points which we haven't had any response to.
Okay, Councillor Kerr.
In terms of the cycle parking, I think we've got the right balance in terms of. I appreciate what you're saying about the provision through the frontage building, but that's considered to be a reasonable provision. It might, I think, yeah. I mean, but we still have the alternatives. It's a very accessible location for walking and for people who want to catch buses and go to and fro beyond town. Landscaping we can deal with by condition if you feel that there's extra energy devoted there. And also materials, etc. We've got to be mindful of the balance between it being in a conservation area and looking at the sustainability credentials, looking at PVs for roof slopes and other options in terms of solar gain or whatever in terms of thermal efficiency achievements. But we can explore that as well, potentially through the materials condition, I would suggest there, Councillor Kerr. And I think that's about it. But yes, mainly all tied up by condition.
Making it clear that they aren't eligible for residence parking permits?
That would be an informative note. We put those as informative notes on these types of applications.
Okay, with all this in mind, do we move to the vote now? All those in favour of the recommendation? That's passed. Thank you. Moving on to item 2, which is pages 32 to 66, site of former Northreach House, Rainsway, Derby. To tell us about this is you or Sarah? To tell us about this is Sarah. Have we settled down now? No. Come on, Mr. Woodard, we're trying to get ahead with this meeting. Okay, Sarah, continue, please.
Just to point out, we've got no updates for members on this application. It's a full application for redevelopment of a former builder's depot at the junction of Belmore Way and Rainsway to form 122 apartments with associated car parking and landscaping. Development would take the form of 2 residential blocks, 1 3-storey and 1 8 stories in height, with 122 residence car parking spaces. Disabled parking and cycle storage is also provided on site. Apartments would be 1 and 2 bed units, each would have a private balcony. Buildings are to be constructed in precast concrete sections manufactured off-site, and areas of solar panels would be formed along the roofs of each block. The site is to be served by 2 vehicular accesses formed onto Rainsway and Belmore Way. The Belmore Way access would be an entrance only, with entrance and egress formed onto the northbound carriageway of Rainsway. Council's Highways Officer has identified the need for a formal pedestrian cycle access arrangement, which has not been shown on the proposed layout. However, we are satisfied that this can be secured and agreed by means of planning conditions, which is incorporated number 17 in your report. Although highway recommendations can also be dealt with by conditions which are attached to the report. In terms of traffic implications, the proposal is not considered to have a material impact on the road network, and in particular the signal junction at the adjacent Rainsway roundabout. The parking provision proposed is considered adequate in this highly sustainable location. The principle of development of this brownfield site for residential is appropriate and considered to meet the policy tests for employment sites in the adopted and saved local plans. The main design considerations for the scheme are concerned with the scale and height of the development in the context of the visual impacts on the surrounding townscape and the impacts on residential amenity of the various nearby housing in Alveston. The 3 and 8 story apartment buildings would be a prominent addition to the street scene in this location, and viewed in the context of the adjacent trunk road network and industrial sites to the north, as well as the residential areas of Alveston to the south. The apartment scheme would also be connected to the residential area, which comprises mainly 2-story houses. And many concerns have been expressed by local residents about their impacts on privacy and amenity, particularly from the proposed 8-story block, which is the one to the north of the site. Having considered the siting, layout and orientation of the 2 apartment blocks, the distances to nearby dwellings on Eden Street and on both sides of Rainsway, these would be in excess of the minimum distances required to prevent unreasonable overlooking and loss of privacy. And these distances are shown on your report, distances from both the 8-story block and the 3-story block. As you can see, the minimum distance would be from the 3-story block is about 28 metres from one of the nearest house on Eden Street. The 8-storey block would be prominent from nearby properties, although habitable windows would be sited some 60 to 70 metres from nearby houses. The 8-storey building is centrally located within this site, and the 3-storey block would provide some screening from the properties to the west and south of the site, as you can see on the plan. Overall, the development is considered to result in no significant harm to the living environments of residential properties in the nearby area. In terms of environmental impacts, the proposal is not considered to give rise to unreasonable effects in relation to air quality or flood risk. In respect to noise impacts, the Environmental Health Officer does maintain some concerns about the potential for occupiers of the apartments to be exposed to high noise levels from traffic and local industry. This particularly relates to the use of the balconies on the apartments fronting the highway and exposure during the nighttime period. Amendments to raise the balcony balustrade height and improve acoustic window glazing are proposed to reduce these noise impacts. And whilst this would provide better noise protection, the Environmental Health Officer still considers that there would be an impact on the amenities of future occupiers, recommends conditions to control the acoustic design of the balconies and the windows. The noise impacts taken as a whole are considered to be amounting to limited harm to the residents' living environment, and this harm must be balanced against the various benefits arising from the development, which are set out in page 61 of your report. Having regard for the relevant local plan policies and overarching NPPF guidance, planning benefits would amount to significant regeneration of a brownfield site, delivery of significant new housing in a highly sustainable location with good accessibility to the transport network and local shopping facilities. Provision of good-sized apartments within a landscape setting would contribute to the local townscape. On balance, these planning benefits are considered to outweigh the limited harm arising from the noise impacts. And the scheme overall, we feel, accords with local plans and national planning context. It's recommended for approval subject to 106 agreement, which has been subject to a viability appraisal scrutinised by the district valuer. He's agreed that terms of contributions set out in page 61 that would normally be required are not affordable for the scheme, and he's recommended an overage mechanism to deal with any future assessment of viability and delivery of contributions at a later date. I think you have 3 speakers tonight.
Thank you, Sarah. The first speaker we have is Mr. Chadwick. Good evening, Mr. Chadwick. You have 3 minutes.
Good evening, Chairman. Thank you. Good evening, members. The application, as you've heard, seeks to develop an underused brownfield site for housing purposes within the urban area. This principle is important because the City Council is trying to maximise the amount of new housing on urban sites so that it minimises the need to develop either greenfield, green wedge or green belt sites. All the relevant planning policies support brownfield development and making the most of the opportunities that come forward for housing on such sites. The proposals themselves are for apartments which will be for rental purposes rather than for sale. Whilst technically this is not affordable housing, the fact that people can rent good quality apartments in a sustainable location without having to have the financial resources to buy them means that they will be relatively affordable in the housing market as a whole. The objections to the scheme relate to the impact of the proposed buildings on their surroundings. However, the distances from proposed new blocks to the houses on the east of Rainsway are between 45 and 70 metres. The nearest houses to the west are 25 to 30 metres away. These distances are substantial, so there would not be an unacceptable impact on the amenity of existing residents. We ask you to accept your officer's analysis of this issue on page 56. Whilst we understand the objections that have been made, in reality the evidence and technical assessments from your highways officers, environmental health officers and the like show that this is an acceptable scheme subject to planning conditions being imposed. The provision of a relatively tall building is entirely suited to the site and is also a means of making the best use of it to help meet housing needs. The trend nationally now is to look at taller buildings as a feasible option to provide for new housing. We therefore ask you to accept your officer's analysis of the planning merits of the application and the compliance of it with key planning policies. There is, as you've seen, considerable common ground already established in negotiations in the Section 106 agreement, and we therefore ask you to resolve to grant planning permission subject to completion of that agreement. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you, Mr. Chadwick. can we have some quiet, please? Thank you. The next speaker is, and I hope I pronounce this right, Mr. Sacconi.
Evening, everybody. I'd just like to say limited harm. If anyone spent any time with people that are dying of asbestosis and asbestos-related diseases, I wouldn't call it limited harm. That site is a toxic dump. In the report, it's 0.4 metres. It's covered in asbestos and arsenic. I don't know of any diggers available that could excavate that site without releasing substantial amount of fibres into the atmosphere. Not only is the whole development not in keeping with the entire area, they're not even in keeping with each other. I wouldn't say I have perfect eyesight, but I think at 60 metres, from a vantage point of 30 metres in the air, I can see much further than 70 metres. I would have a good vantage point over the surrounding area. This site doesn't really give the people of Derby or the people of Alveston what it really needs. The analysis by a company called Acoris that did some work for Derby City Council in 2012 highlighted a real need for things like bungalows and ground floor flats for people with physical disabilities, in wheelchairs and so on. There's many people that are stuck in properties that are far too large for them, and they simply don't have an alternative property to move to in the area or outside the area. The reports that I read on this development made significant statements about noise pollution and air quality, and it made a statement about the air quality not even factoring in the A511 ring road because it was unable to. Well, the A511 ring road is the main thoroughfare around that site. It also makes a statement about being able to mitigate the noise and air pollution by the use of windows and air vents. Well, air vents let air into a property. They don't shield property from the outside air, and windows are designed to be opened. So I don't see how that's going to mitigate the problems with air pollution and noise pollution. I think this development will betray generations of people in Alveston and the people moving in. And I think it says one clear message out to all concerned, the people already living in Alveston, the people that may live in those properties in the future, and that message is, we don't care about you. It's made quite clear in the report that people would be aware before moving in about the noise pollution and air quality.
Thank you, Mr. Sacconi. However, I can confirm that the City Council cares about all its residents and not just Alveston or any others. Thank you.
So you're just going to ignore it?
We have Councillor Graves.
Thank you, Councillor. Members of the committee, you will see that this application will have a serious impact on a nice suburb of Derby, namely Alveston. I hope you've all read the objections, that 437, all from local residents. This has got to be one of the most objected applications to have ever come before you, and I praise those who organised themselves so that 437 objections could be registered rather than one through a petition. This is how strongly local people feel about this application. Whilst I respect your deliberations as planning members and the legal issues that you have to go through, I would like you to consider talking about local democracy here. Local residents' opinions should be considered, and you couldn't get a louder comment than 437 objections. I pointed out some of the issues in my objection letter, including the fact that this is contrary to the local plan and this application does not fit well in terms of additional new buildings. This is so out of keeping with Alveston that the development is from another world. If I could mention some of the history of Alveston and the flats and apartments, we had the Isle of Wight blocks of flats at the end of Alveston Lane. These had to be demolished as they had become a blot on the landscape and a slum. These were 4 stories high. We also have Brindley Court in the ward, which was converted to luxury flats, allegedly. We had many problems with these over many years, and we have managed to reduce the incidence to minor antisocial behaviour. Alveston is for houses. Where we do have flats, they are the same level as the roofs of the surrounding houses. This development will be a monster invading our spaces. Whilst I'm intrigued by the design methods, I feel this sort of development is best suited in the city centre, where there are many types of these buildings around them. In your report, you talk about, in section 7.5, it talks about section 106 funding and the fact that the developer says there is no money in it for him to provide this. Yet the report does not mention the agreement that the developer has agreed to a deal with the smaller block. My meeting with the Blom representative in early January made it clear to me that the smaller block would be offered to the council either as a whole or at a knockdown price. The council will be aware of this and will surely have an influence on your decision today. I hope this is taken into account in legal terms. Members of the committee, I do not accept the findings of the highway survey, mainly because you visited on a Thursday mid-morning when traffic was relatively quiet. Yet this section of Rainsway is very congested in rush hour and can be for long periods of the day. A more detailed approach to surveying would have shown that. To add another 122 plus vehicles will exacerbate these problems. The sheer impact of this development will be negative and the whole community, and I ask you to reject this outright.
Thank you, Councillor Dave.
Thank you, Chair. I'm going to let my highways and environmental health colleagues deal specifically with the traffic and the noise and air quality issues, but just in general terms to come back on some of the points that were raised. In terms of the fact that it is a contaminated site, it is an informal employment site, and the applicant has submitted site investigation reports with the application, which our environmental health team have looked at, and as with any normal application for redevelopment of a site such as this, remediation would be part of the scheme and would be conditioned. In terms of development, in terms of amenity, as I said before, it is a large development. It is a tall building, the 8-storey building, and we have carefully considered the impacts that that sort of scale of development would have on the residential properties which are around it, particularly in relation to the fact they are mainly to the south of the site. We feel the way they've orientated this scheme means that the impacts are minimised and that the distances they are achieving are, like I said, well in excess of the distances we'd normally require. And obviously, because it is 8-storey, would require more. But like I said, they are mostly 60 to 70 metres from the nearest houses, from habitable room windows to windows. So on balance, we feel that it won't have a significant harmful effect on the amenities of nearby residents, and that in that respect, that scheme is acceptable. In terms of the flats, I noticed the comment about the fact they are flats. It is a flatted scheme. They are 1- and 2-bed units, but the application makes it clear that these flats are quite generous in size. Like I said, each unit has a balcony, so we feel that they are quite reasonable quality residential schemes and flats, which obviously the developer and the applicant need to market in their own way. But we are looking at the planning merits of the scheme as opposed to the potential occupants or any other issues that may arise with contractual issues. But like I said, if my environmental health colleagues and highways colleagues can deal with the specific issues on noise and traffic.
Thank you, Mr. Sacconi. Can we have some order, please? Thank you.
Chair, all I can really add is that my colleague in Transport Planning has assessed the development and the information that was provided by the applicant, and both he and our traffic signals expert say that there's not going to be a significant impact as a result of the development. They're the experts in that particular field.
Thank you. Can we have some quiet, please? Thank you.
I'll try and project my voice. Sorry, my microphone's not working. Regarding, there was a couple of issues that we picked up on as a team. The first, there was a couple of concerns about land contamination. There was a mention, I know, from one of the speakers about asbestos and various contaminants that are on site. Not uncommon. It's a previous commercial industrial site. And I suppose the main point to make about that is that as part of the consent, should it be given, there would be a requirement for a remediation scheme for the site to make sure. So from our perspective, brownfield land, this is an opportunity to actually clean up the site, and if it's left in the current state, actually that's actually a worse situation for the land, particularly for things
Tony, I don't really want to ask anybody to escort you out, so can we please just keep it as it is in order? Thank you.
So in terms of... Yeah, I know it's... Yeah, come over here then. Apologies. I have amplification. Okay, so yes, regarding the land contamination, like I say, there would actually we perceive benefit for developing a site like this because it's an opportunity to remediate the site, and considering the site is majority hard-standing car parking and buildings, what that in effect does is it breaks the pathway for contamination that might be in the ground, so actually that actually minimises any risks that might be on site currently. And like I say, as part of the application, part of the consent, there would be conditions for a remediation scheme, and that would be part of a requirement before occupation anyway of the site, to make sure that the site was cleaned up. Regarding air quality, not a great deal to add in terms of my comments, but absolutely I share the concerns regarding the exposure of future residents of this site. It's a very, very busy road location. There are quite high levels of pollution here. The only thing that really makes this site acceptable in air quality terms is the fact that the buildings are actually being set quite a way back from the road. And in reality, for things like nitrogen dioxide, where the levels, even if they're exceeding in the road, the levels actually drop off incredibly quickly. Within 10 metres of a road like this, even if the levels were exceeding national objectives, health criteria, within 10 metres, you would find that the levels have dropped below those objectives. So the site...
Can we please have some quiet? Thank you.
Mr. Chairman. The assessment that's been included with the application is a detailed modelling exercise, and it confirms that also. And regarding noise concerns, again, I think that's been covered already. We've got some concerns about that. For future occupants, it's a noisy location, and I would maintain those concerns in relation to noise for future occupants, particularly, obviously, the outdoor living areas, where the balconies where there's no noise insulation protection. So we do have concerns about noise.
Thank you.
Thank you, Chair.
Members of the committee, Councillor Froggatt. Mr. Teasdale will tell us about it.
Sorry. I think Rachel is actually here to talk about Section 106s, but just to cover a couple of points. In terms of the viability, I mean, we don't accept what the developer actually tells us when he says he can't afford it. We actually employ the district valuer to go through the figures. who's employed by, well, appointed by ourselves. So we do get an independent assessment of those figures. Now, in terms of actually how it's calculated, effectively the district value is allowing the developer an element of profit to say whether it's viable. So it's not a case of the developer will necessarily run out of money. It's just saying that he based on the figures that he's been put forward, he will only achieve a set level of profit. Now, what we do in that case, where the district valuer has said that, we say, right, well, in case you actually do make a profit higher than that, then we'll enter a Section 106, which provides for overage. So basically, we take a share of any profit over and above what the profit is made, okay? So there is security on that. I mean, one can never say whether a developer will go out of business on any development, but sort of, it's not a case as though the developer in this case is saying he's fine to the bone in terms of delivering the development.
Are you happy with that, Councillor Froggatt? Rachel.
I think Stephen said all I was going to say, so I don't think I've got anything to add to that. Thanks.
Thank you. Members of the committee? Councillor Wood.
Thank you, Chairman. I'd be the first to say that we should be building residential properties on brownfield sites before we go into the green fields around the outside of our city. And this is a site that certainly needs improvement. However, this is 2017, and one of the biggest events that's happened in this country in residential property in this year has been the disaster at Grenfell Tower. There's been no mention yet of whether this has fire sprinklers. I thought that was a policy we didn't even have to mention anymore, but nobody's said much about that. Yes, this could be residential, but why does it have to be tower blocks? Derby doesn't have tower blocks. It used to be said that Derby was so behind the times that by the time we'd got tower blocks all over the country, we realised they weren't the sort of places people wanted to live in. You can develop residential land by putting tower blocks on their side almost physically, so that you have two-storey buildings, or at most 2.5 come 3 in an area like this, and get as many units out of it quite happily. I'm opposed to tower blocks. Now, whether we can legally say that, I don't know. Whether that's a reason for turning it down, I don't know. But if you look around Derby, it's a 2-storey city, all over Derby. We've been spared some of the disasters, apart from, say, Rivermead House or 1 or 2, which are reasonably popular. Derby is 2-storey, and to put an eyesore in this position is just not fair to the local people. I'm not saying that to be popular, because my party has very little hope of anything in that area. We have a tall buildings policy, which was developed 2 or 3 years ago, which is sitting in somebody's in-tray, but never mentioned these days. I wonder how this would fit if that was actually somebody got round to adopting that tall buildings policy. Yes, develop this area, but this application isn't the right one. There's plenty of new employment going on over the other side of Rainsway. Rolls-Royce along Rainsway itself probably have a lot of people there on short-term contracts that would want this sort of accommodation. But why do we have to put tower blocks in a place like that? I really don't like it, and although I can't find a genuine defensible reason that would stand up at appeal to oppose it, I don't like it.
Thank you, Councillor Wood. Anybody else? Councillor.
Thank you, Chair. I'd like to add to Robin's sentiment, really. Predominantly around that area are 1930s houses, private on one side and council, some private now on the other. It is a transient area between industrial, commercial and residential, and it is on the fringes of Ulverston, and it is a brownfield site which we do want developed. But this development is just not at all in keeping with Ulverston and the area. A 1960s out-of-dated tower block next to 1930s houses, in my opinion, is a disaster for us to go down that route. The council has already stated that they've got concerns about noise and they're trying to mitigate those with the developer. Well, if that's the case, surely the site should be redeveloped, as Robin stated, with traditional houses that are in keeping with the rest of Ulverston, and not something as large as this. I thought we'd gone away from these tower blocks and large buildings, so why now? I know we've got strains on housing, but that shouldn't be a reason for us to succumb to something as extreme as this. The I-Waste survey that mentioned by Councillor Graves, it's not been answered really, that it was done, I think, mid-morning on a Thursday. And it's a pertinent point, because if that is the case, it really should be readdressed and looked at busier times. It's not fair to just assess it with a mid-morning survey. I'd like a definitive answer on that, please. And really, we've got 437 objections here, and surely I've not heard anything in defence of the residents of Ulverston, and surely where's the consideration there of what the residents are stating to us? So really, I will be objecting to this development wholeheartedly. Thank you.
Thank you for your comments, but equally I think Councillor Wood did say that, yes, whilst we may not like this development, the fact of the matter is there isn't very many planning rules that we can refuse it on. Chris, did you want to come in again about the traffic survey?
All I can say again, Chair, is that it was assessed by my colleague in Transport Planning. Unfortunately, he's not here. I can't say any more than that.
Anybody else want to comment? Councillor Harwood.
Thank you, Chair. Well, I agree with my colleagues on this one. Quite honestly, this particular application is well outside what's required in the area. It really will be like a sore thumb standing there. And in actual fact, there is a point being made on the fact that the Environmental Protection Team feel that it could be justified in being turned down on a noise amenity grounds. And I go along with that. Just think about the problems there already with the constant noise, and this will only add to it. I agree with Councillor Wood. Do we really want 8-storey high buildings at the end of our very precious areas like Ulverston? And quite honestly, at the end of the day, if it gets passed through, to me, it will be not in keeping with what I would expect this planning committee to do, because quite honestly, we've got enough with the 8-storey high buildings in the city centre without inflicting them on residential areas. So I'll be against the application as well.
Anybody else? Would somebody like to move to the vote? All those in favour of the recommendation? Five, including me. All those against? 5. Yeah, that was 5-all, but as my casting vote, the planning application is approved.
Chairman, when did you vote the first time? I'm not disputing that you can use your casting vote to vote with your your Labour colleagues.
Sorry, what are you
But you
disputing,
did not
Councillor Wood?
vote in the first round. We did.
Yes. We did.
Can I propose, Chair, we have a revote, please? Have a
Can you please be quiet, otherwise I'll have to ask them to escort you out.
Sorry. Can I just come in and clarify?
What about doctors?
Right.
What about everything else?
Yeah.
And the safety aspect.
Mr. Chairman, are you considering the house here?
Thank you. Can I just clarify?
Take another vote.
Are you considering the house?
Sorry, if you don't be quiet, I will have to ask them to escort you out. I'm sorry about that, but...
That's a big excuse. Just get rid of us. Just get rid of us. Why are you coming down to you?
Could I just explain, please?
We voted you in.
Can we have some quiet, please, whilst I just clarify what happened on the vote, please? I know that everybody is probably sort of upset. We can appreciate that. Both members and officers can do that. But it would be helpful if we could just have a bit of quiet, and I will explain exactly what happened.
Explaining's not going to help us.
It may not to, but at least it will clarify for other members. Just to clarify for Councillor Wood, when the vote was taken, I can confirm that the chair did actually put his arm up. He did put his hand up. He did. I physically saw him put his hand up. Well, I saw. Right. Chair, would... Right.
Can we please be quiet? Look, just for clarification, Councillor Wood and Councillor Hassel, if you're telling me that I don't know when I put my hand up, I'm sorry, it's my hands, I know when I put them up. If you can't see it, it's not my problem.
Do you want to take the vote again, just to clarify? Okay.
If you feel that you need to clarify the vote, you can take the vote again, there's no problem with it.
Chairman, can I ask, Chairman, is this meeting being recorded? Is this meeting being recorded?
Yes, I hope so.
In which case, there can be no dispute. We will be able to see from the recording when and how you voted.
You are more than welcome to have a look at the recording, Mr. Councillor Wood, because you will see that I put my hand up like that, so unfortunately...
There's an awful lot of people who don't think that was the case.
Well, I can't help but awful lot of people think, but you're more than welcome to have a look at the recording.
Chair, may I have a word, Chair, as a member of this committee? Please, Chair?
I am offering you the choice. If you want to take the vote again, you can do, but in answer to your question, Councillor Wood, yes, you can have a look at the recording and you will see quite clearly that I put my hand up.
Obviously I can. And what I'm trying to say is the public can also look at that recording. Perhaps people would like to tell them how they can see that recording, because it is rather important that democracy is seen to be carried or it isn't.
Chair.
When we have a lot of witnesses to one thing and the solicitors saying the opposite to what...
Chair, may I make a proposition, please? Chair, can I propose that this item is held over until the next meeting and discussed again?
No, Councillor Harwood, that is not the case, and you know that's not right.
Chair, for clarification, I suggest that perhaps, I don't see a problem if you wish to take the vote again, for clarification, for absolute clarification.
Chair. If you do not want that, Councillor Wood, in that case, then the recommendation is carried.
Excuse me, Chair. Can I just say, I've just been informed that it will be on YouTube tomorrow, the video recording.
Well, that's fine if it's on mainstream TV, it doesn't matter to me, right? So let's get on with it.
Just take the vote, put your hands up high so we can all see.
Well, do you just want to take the vote again? Yeah. Do you want to take the vote again?
You can take the vote again.
Who's against it?
I mean, they're not asking for the vote anyway. He's not asking for it.
Well, yeah, but it would clarify. So if it was clarify, it would just clarify. Sorry?
Does anybody want to take the vote again? Right, okay, then let's clarify it again for the purpose of everybody, and in particular Councillor Wood and Councillor Hess. All those in favour of the recommendation?
No way!
Right. All those against it? Recommendation is carried.
That's it then, isn't it? 5.
That's 5 against 5.
Do you want to casting votes? Clarify the casting vote. No. Just to explain for members of the public who are not aware, the chair has exercised a casting vote.
Oh yeah, we know what that is, don't we?
Where the vote is equal, the chair has the ability to get
It's not
cast.
equal, it's 5 against 4.
It's 5 against 5.
5 against 4.
Okay, well.
Here's the one person. That's 5 against 5. That's not casting votes.
Okay, well.
I did it within the community.
Paid for it.
We'll have a small adjournment of 10 minutes. Councillor Harwood, can you take your place, please? We're going to do four. Okay, thank you. I'm going to take 10 Farley Road in view of the fact that Mr. Fitzgerald has employed a solicitor, so I wanted to save his costs. So we'll take 10 Farley Road first. Mr. Clark on 10 Farley Road.
Thank you, Chair. This application, members will be familiar with the site. It seeks to vary conditions 2 and 4 related to previously approved plans. The main changes between the scheme approved under the 2014 permission and the development now before you is the introduction of a short landing area, 1.2 metres out from the back of the property and 6.7 metres in width. So it goes out, effectively it's a step out area beyond the patio doors and then down some steps. That's what we're here to discuss tonight. And the applicant is also seeking to mitigate for the removal of trees and vegetation which was previously within the rear curtilage. From this distance with a light pen, it is just that bit there. There's a long flat area, 1.2 metres out, and then the steps. Everything else has approval. I've called it in the report a landing area. Objectors have called it a patio. Members will recall there was a patio previously proposed, which you refused, which was approximately 4 metres in depth out from the back of the building. And you were concerned about overlooking, etc., and impact on the neighbours. In addition to that landing area, the applicant, to help address privacy concerns, has proposed side-facing ground floor to ceiling windows to the family room and dining room, which projects, which projects from next to the landing area to be obscure glazed. Those windows were approved clear glazing anyway, but he's now gone for obscure glazing in there, and then that continues along the side of the landing area as an obscure glazed glass panel which screens the landing area if anybody were to stand on there. At 1.2 metres, it's almost a step out area. In your report, you'll have seen, for background and context, because members were so concerned about the previous scheme that, and to take enforcement action on the previous scheme, that we sought barrister opinion. That's where you got the picture of what was there in your report before this new build. And the conclusions of our barrister on page 138, he said, my instructions asked me to consider what enforcement action might be appropriate. It follows from my conclusions that there is not much that can be enforced against. So we have a dwelling there, it's working again, which is approved, has planning permission, 2014. The applicant, he's taken his own soundings from his own barrister, and which concurs with ours, that he can build that, he has been doing. The subject of your deliberations is that small piece, the addition to that permission. And we have reiterated those controlling conditions, conditions 1 through to 11, that were on the 2014 permission, as we have to, because he's seeking to amend a couple of conditions in the original scheme. Other than that, Chair, it's a short landing, and I recommend the scheme for approval. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Mr. Clark. We have a speaker on this, Ms. Chapman from Nelson Solicitors.
Thank you, Chair and members, for allowing me to address you this evening. We are here tonight due to a unique set of circumstances. In June this year, you unanimously refused an application for a raised patio and regularisation of the ground levels on this site. You asked for enforcement action to be taken due to the harm being caused. Mr and Mrs Fitzgerald could finally see an end to this nightmare. And yet today, we are back here and yet again discussing another application for a raised patio. But this time, members, you are being told that the original planning permission authorised this property as built. A property with a ground floor level with the top of Mr and Mrs Fitzgerald's 6-foot garden fence. My clients have always considered that members were misled into approving this original application, but your officers have maintained that members were given sufficient information to make an informed decision. This makes no sense given what you were asked to determine in June. I genuinely do not believe that you would have approved that property had you fully been informed as to the detrimental impact of it. So where are we now? A planning permission appears to have been granted in error, but members should not be blamed for this. We should move on and bring this matter to a close. You have before you an application for a raised patio or landing which requires consent. The original planning consent did not include a patio, and we have council's opinion to that effect. Yes, the patio has been reduced in size, but it is clear that a raised patio or landing of any kind is simply unacceptable here. A raised patio exacerbates the impact of the property with further intrusion into Mr and Mrs Fitzgerald's private amenity space. The patio will overlook their rear lounge area and dining area as well as the full extent of their garden. Obscure glazed panels are still proposed at either side of the patio, and at 2 metres high, these panels would be oppressive, overbearing and stark in appearance. They would be fully visible from all parts of Mr and Mrs Fitzgerald's garden and rear of their property. They do not blend in with their surroundings and would be an unsightly feature to neighbouring properties and detrimental to visual amenity. They will lead to a loss of outlook from their rear lounge and dining area. Lastly, the patio remains open across the majority of the east elevation, therefore offering no privacy to the family from this part. Their privacy within the rear habitable rooms of their property and majority of their garden will be entirely undermined. There is no need to have a raised patio at this property. The only way to mitigate against the harm already caused is for steps down from the property with no landing or patio area. Members, I urge you this evening to prevent any more harm being forced upon Mr and Mrs Fitzgerald, and please refuse this application. Thank you for your time.
Thank you, Ms Chapman. We have Mr Warriner.
Good evening, councillors. I'll be brief because a lot of my points have been said already. For those of you who were here, you'll remember in June that this proposal was rejected, and it shouldn't be misrepresented now that it's only a matter of the patio. This rear elevation of this property is excessive. That was the reason for rejecting the proposal previously. I'd urge you to do the same again and to make certain the planning committee's minutes are written up accordingly, please. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr Mariner. Councillor Hazelgrave.
Thank you, Chair, for allowing me to speak again on the Fitzgerald family's behalf. Chair, fellow councillors, we are presented here with a reapplication for works on 10 Farley Road, which to some extent takes into account the outcome of the previous application. However, this new proposed landing terrace is at the exact same ground level as the previously rejected patio. So whilst it will reduce in surfaced area and take the form of a relatively narrow strip, it will still constitute an intrusion on the Fitzgerald's privacy, as they will still be overlooked to the same extent and from the same dominating position. Any such issue would have been greatly mitigated if the mature trees had not been removed at an early stage of works on 10 Farley Road, and I remind committee that the trees should not have been removed as part of the works, as you rightly afforded them protection in the original application. It is clear that only the planting of mature rooted trees matching the position of those wrongfully removed will mitigate the attack on the Fitzgerald's privacy, which the whole development represents. Such a move would be a tangible evidence of a will for genuine compromise and due regard for the Fitzgerald's right to privacy. I ask the committee to consider stipulating, if you are mindful to grant this application, to consider stipulating that a number of mature rooted trees be planted by the owners of 10 Farley Road, such that their position is directly between the sightline of the landing terrace and 2A Cathedral View. For clarification, I would beg the Chair and Committee to seek information and advice from officers present as to the viability of such a proposal. Last time, I spoke to you about the profound impact of the whole development on all the members of the family. I spoke to you in detail about its traumatic effect on the lives and well-being of the two boys, Jack and Dylan. Since then, their mother, Donna, has had to take time off her job because she feels overwhelmed by this situation, which has been ongoing almost 2 years from when she contacted planning about her deep concerns over the original application submitted by 10 Farley Road. But the Fitzgeralds very much appreciated your ruling the last time you considered this matter, and I am delighted to report that the lowering of tension in the household contributed in no small measure to a very impressive set of GCSE results for Jack. 1A star, 3 A's, 6 B's and 2 C's, or the new equivalents. He has taken up the offer of one of only 12 direct Toyota apprenticeships and hopes to follow this through with Toyota to degree level. This is concrete evidence of how much your support matters and how it positively impacts on the family. I urge the committee to explore how they can further support the family by examining the potential for including in the plans of mature trees should you choose to grant this application with conditions. This will be fully in line with government guidelines, planning applications which steer towards compromise as a solution to disputed applications. Thank you, Chair and followers, for your and fellow councillors for your indulgent attention.
Thank you, Councillor Hazelgrave. Mr. Clark, would you like to come back on the tree issue?
Can I add trees as a fourth issue, Chair? That before you is the proposed plan. James, can you flick to the refused one? That's so I'm back again, so you can see the difference. That's the landing, that's the patio, that's what you refused, that's what's seeking approval. Can you go to one of the photographs? Okay, that'll do. That window, the ground floor window closest to the boundary there is built as floor to ceiling, is proposed in this scheme as a window, so it's not floor to ceiling. Equally the same at that side. And is there a side elevation photograph, James? That'll do. That window there, approved clear glazing, proposed before you as obscure glazing with the steps and the glazed panel beyond that. In terms of trees, I wrote to, when we were advised of the loss of those trees, there you go, that's the site with the trees, and they were removed contrary to condition. So I wrote to the applicant and said, you really need to plant some more trees of the height and canopy spread shown on your plans. 8 were removed according to your plans. There's none there now, apart from some replanting which doesn't really appear on top of above the fence. And I suggested extra heavy standards, which are big trees. They'll cost something to do, but you shouldn't have taken the originals out. And we could bolt that on to condition 8, Chair, which is a condition controlling tree protection measures, and also condition 7 regarding implementation of a landscaping scheme. So with that amendment, Chair, I'd recommend that to you. So condition 6 is the landscaping scheme with the extra heavy standards or the like to make that difference. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Mr. Clark. Members of the committee? Councillor Evans.
Chair, could I just see the rear elevation view proposed, the drawing, and then also the plan quickly on the screen, just to explain something? that I noticed. Well, is there the actual drawing? Have you got the actual drawings? Yeah, okay. Really, what I was looking at is on where the landing area comes out, the doors are concertina, so the doors protrude out. So it doesn't look like there's room to put any patio equipment or anything like that on the landing area. So yes, somebody could stand on it to walk down the steps, but I wanted to just check that that is the case. And I agree entirely that it should be conditional on extra heavy standards, replacement trees.
Chair, if it helps, it's on the floor plan, James. Thank you. Can you increase the top there? Is that possible? That's it. I think what Councillor Evans is saying is those bifold doors, you see how they're, if you slid them from that corner out, you haven't got much room beyond them because of the doors actually concertinaing and compacting up into that space.
Is that clarity for you, Councillor Evans?
It does, Chair, thank you.
Anybody else? Councillor West.
Thank you, Chair. I appreciate Mr Clark's comments about replanting of trees, because I think it's something that if they hadn't taken the trees out in the first place, we probably wouldn't be here with quite so many issues. Can we condition for the trees to be replaced as were in existence? So fully grown, whatever they were, because they're fairly impressive from that picture, and to have those planted prior to this patio area being built.
Mr Clark.
Trees have to be planted in the planting season, and I doubt you get specimens of that size that were there. I've seen trees lifted. You get a great big scoop, but it's the roots, it's the ball of the roots as well. With machinery, you'd never get it into this space. I'm suggesting extra heavy standards. I am hopeful that they will get them down the side of the building, otherwise they might need assistance from neighbouring properties to achieve it. But there's a realistic proposition of trying to find that compromise and to, in time, get the tree coverage that was there, because you'll never replace what was there. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Mr Clark. Anybody else? Yeah.
Thank you, Paul. I think the issue I have with this, and I'm fairly sure at least one colleague does too, this predates me being a member of the planning committee. This was considered before I joined the planning committee. I can only imagine how long that has felt like for the people, for the neighbouring properties. Also, given the history that we have with the applicant not complying with conditions and not responding to correspondence from ourselves, I'm afraid I couldn't support this if we couldn't condition substantial trees being replanted prior to this work starting.
Councillor Woods.
We've asked them before to put the trees back and they haven't. What faith have we that we put down a condition to make them put them back and they still don't? We haven't got an enforcement officer to go and see that they do. They've tried it on. These people have suffered enough, and I don't think this should be allowed. It's it's unreasonable. You know, they're trying to build a house to give a view over the city and cathedral view from a place where you can't see the cathedral view. So we've seen this all right through. I mean, I remember the original application when saving the tree and all that sort of thing. It's always been a dodgy one, and quite honestly, they haven't even done the decent thing and said, we'll put the trees back. Just to say that, oh yes, you can have your landing, or whatever you want to call it, platform, because, yeah, and there'll be a condition that you have to put in reasonable trees. They're not going to do it, are they? Not on their current record, and I don't think we should give them that opportunity.
Mr. Clark, can you clarify what they're asking there?
Well, let's stick our neck out and say no development on the platform shall be commenced until you have satisfactorily planted 8, was what was removed, what did I say, extra heavy standard trees. Because at the moment, they can carry on living in that building, but you got those bifold patio doors in the back and then a drop. So they will want to get access to their garden, and it's a matter of compromise. And bearing in mind what Councillor Wood said about them doing one thing and saying another, it gives members of the committee some surety that you can't have your steps down to your garden until you actually do what we are concerned about.
Councillor Wood, Councillor West, is that acceptable?
Chair, it is a try. They could appeal the condition, but it's at least you flexing your muscle, exercising your right to say, yes, it's acceptable, but you've got to do this.
Councillor Harwood.
Thank you, Chair. Well, Councillor Wood and West are right. This applicant feels that he can do what the heck he likes. We went on a site visit, he was told to stop doing certain work, and yet he carried on doing it. How can we trust him to do anything at all? I would say that patio should come out of the old application, quite honestly, because that's causing more problems, and certainly the neighbours are absolutely justified in saying that it's going to be a great happenings to their lives. And quite honestly, no way can we trust this applicant to carry out what we want. He'll probably put trees in. I bet they're not of the height that gives satisfaction for this proposal. It's quite honestly quite ridiculous. This committee have been absolutely taken to the cleaners by this applicant. We told him what he needed to do and just carried on. Sorry, no way should he carry on. My opinion, it should be thrown out and he's told to get rid of the patio.
Anybody else? Okay, would somebody like to move to the vote with the extra condition on? Yeah. All those in favour with the extra condition? All those against? That's carried 6-3.
Thank you, Mr. Clark.
Okay. We're now moving to 12 to 14 Mansfield Road, pages 75 to 115. And to tell us about this is Sarah. You can start, Sarah.
Thank you, Chair. Just a couple of updates for members. We've had a revised flood risk assessment and evacuation plan on this application, which received yesterday, which deals with residual flood risk resulting from a potential breach of the flood defences currently being developed by the Our City, Our River programme. I'd also like to just point out a correction to the listing details of the silk mill, which in pages 99 and 110 of your report, it's referred to as grade 2 star, but it's actually grade 2 listed, so I just need to correct that. This is a full application for redevelopment of a former manufacturing site known as Anachrome Jigs on Mansfield Road in Chester Green for the erection of a block of 33 1- and 2-bedroom apartments. The site currently has a group of 2-storey buildings, some of which date from the mid-19th century. It's a small brownfield site which has been vacant for a long period of time, and it's located at the junction of Fox Street and Phoenix Street. The design, scale and form of the development has been amended significantly during the course of the application, which was submitted originally in 2014, to address concerns from heritage and design consultees to the original design. The revised scheme has been reduced in scale to 5 stories in height. Its appearance has been altered to a more rectangular form and using a more mixed traditional palette of materials with large glazed sections on the principal elevations. And these are some images that have been submitted by the applicant. The apartment building would wrap around 3 sides of the small site with a recessed floor at the 5th floor. The ground floor will be primarily undercroft car parking with 26 spaces including cycle parking and disabled, with all accommodation being on the upper floors. The development has a contemporary design and form, and the applicant has used the council's 3D model, which is illustrated on the screen, to illustrate the building in context and to illustrate the visual impacts on the surrounding townscape and historic environment. The development would impact on the setting and character of various heritage assets in the vicinity of the site. In order of significance, the site is adjacent to the Derwent Valley Mills World Heritage Site and its buffer zone, affects the setting of listed buildings, which include the Grade 1 St Mary's Chapel, Grade 2 Star St Mary's Bridge, Grade 2 St Mary's Bridge House and the Grade 2 listed Silk Mill. It is in vicinity of 3 conservation areas, including the city centre, Little Chester and Nottingham Road. It also lies opposite the locally listed Waterside Inn, which is the former Bridge Inn. The site itself does not have any designated heritage features, though the Conservation Officer has identified the Victorian buildings on the site of being some limited heritage value. The Conservation Officer and the World Heritage Site panel both consider that development would have a visual impact on the setting and significance of all of these heritage features, although they are generally satisfied that the impacts would be at the lower end of the scale of harm, described as slight to negligible for all except the locally listed pub, which is has a moderate impact. Since the building is on the local list, the effect on its setting is balanced against its lesser historical importance. No substantive objections have been received from the heritage bodies, including the Conservation Officer, although the Conservation Advisory Committee have raised objections to the scheme on the grounds that the existing buildings on site should be retained and their concerns about scale and massing of the current proposal. However, it is noted that these concerns are not shared by the other heritage consultees. In terms of harm to those affected heritage assets, this is considered to be of a limited degree, although the harm is classed as less as substantial for the purposes of the MPPF, paragraph 134. The development is therefore strictly contrary to the heritage policies, CP20, of the adopted Plan Part 1, and saved policies E18 and E19 of the City of Derby Local Plan Review. In the planning balance, the limited harm must be weighed against the public benefits of the development, which in this case is considered significant. The harm to the non-designated heritage assets, which includes the locally listed pub, are assessed as being more significant and must be considered against the paragraph 135 of the MPPF, which requires a balanced judgment to be made, weighing up the harm against the benefits of the development. The benefits, in this case, which would be provided, are set out in page 101 of your report. In summary, these include delivery of significant new housing in a highly sustainable and accessible location close to the city centre, development of a brownfield site, and contributing to the city's overall housing need, high-quality residential development in terms of its design, contribution to the townscape, and the delivery of affordable housing and contributions towards public open space and new flood defences, which were developed through the OCOR scheme. These latter were all secured through the Section 106 package. These substantial benefits are considered to outweigh the harm to the significance and setting of those various heritage features which are identified as being affected. In terms of highways impacts, the traffic generation would not be materially different from the previous use, and the parking and access arrangements are considered acceptable following revisions to the visibility displays at the entrance. Highways officers have not raised objections on highway safety grounds. In relation to other environmental impacts, the site is at high risk of flooding, is within flood zone 3A and is adjacent to the Our City, Our River corridor, which is currently being developed for package 1 of the flood defences. OCOR would provide some enhanced flood protection for the development site, although it would still be potentially exposed to a high flood risk in the event of a breach of those defences or an overtopping in a significant flood event. Key consideration, this remains outstanding, is ensuring that the development would be safe for the occupants of such a flood event. Whilst the Environment Agency withdrew their objections to the development in 2016, there is an updated flood risk position for sites which would benefit from OCOR, which requires breach analysis to be carried out for the development to assess the flood resistance of the building and an evacuation and safety strategy for the residents. These requirements are reflected in the Council's land drainage comments, which are on page 88 and 89. The revised flood risk assessment, which I referred to earlier, seeks to address those residual flood risk issues. This has been subject to reconsultation of the flood risk consultees. Land Drainage has responded to this and considers that there are just 3 outstanding issues which should be agreed post-committee and satisfy that they can be dealt with by the recommended conditions which are outlined in your report. These require submission of a thorough and complete information before development commences. Firstly, those revisions to extend the external escape stairway to street frontage are welcomed. Detailed levels of the stairway would need to be agreed to tie in with the predicted flood level, and condition 12, which is in your report for flood evacuation, will be amended to include the details of that staircase. Secondly, the levels of the plant room would need to be agreed to ensure flood resilience in a breach scenario. And thirdly, the evacuation plan should be amended to ensure safe access and egress from the building is demonstrated. Like I said, all these 3 would be covered in the conditions which are included in your report. It is considered, therefore, that the development can be made flood resilient and safe for the occupants of the building to protect it from a significant flood event. In relation to other environmental impacts, reports have been submitted for bat activity on site, noise impacts from the adjacent transport corridor, and exposure to poor air quality due to the site being located in the air quality management area. And these issues have all been satisfactorily addressed and mitigated through use of planning conditions. Overall, the apartment scheme is considered to be a high-quality scheme which will contribute to the urban townscape in this location and gives rise to benefits which outweigh the limited harm to those heritage features. Flood risk impacts on the development can be satisfactorily resolved through conditions, and subject to the completion of the 106, the proposal is considered to be in accordance with the local plan and the overarching guidance in the NPPF. It is therefore recommended for approval.
Thank you, Sarah. We have no speakers, so it's up to the committee members. Anybody want to speak on it? Councillor Hassel.
Thank you, Chair. I understand from the report it's 6 stories high, but there's no measurement that I can find of an actual height. And it'd be interesting to know how high it is in relation to the buildings around it. So like the Prime building adjacent and the one on the corner of City Road. And also your artist impressions there's no real context to which way we're looking at it. From which elevation? All right, thank you.
We're just trying to find the elevations on the screen at the moment. It is a 5-storey building. The elevations that you can see on the screen at the moment is the rear elevation, which backs onto the Landau Forte College side of the site. Yeah, that's the front elevation, which is facing Mansfield Road. That fronts onto the St Mary's Bridge, and the local former Bridge Inn. Can't get it to work. Is that one there? And the other one. That's the view from sort of north of the site, from sort of Chester Green side. So it shows its narrow, sort of triangular shape at that end of the building.
What do you want?
Elevation.
Yeah, okay. Keep talking.
What else to say? He's getting it.
Yeah, I'm getting
Jamie
it.
just searching for an elevation.
Can you measure it?
Yeah, I'll measure it. Well, I'll put it up, but that's what I was trying to do, get a measurement copy.
No.
That's the one.
That's Fox Street, yes, on this
Yeah.
this side, yeah.
Yeah. That's the one. Is that it?
He's getting
Jamie's
it.
just working on to get a dimension off it as well, Chair.
I'm going to.
We can always move on
Yeah.
if anybody else wants to speak.
Well, we'll move on, Chair.
Councillor Pegg.
It's been interesting to see the actual better dimensions if they'd put Landau Forte at the back of it on the actual drawings, so you get a far better view of the height and everything. There's a picture early on where I was looking at from some green fields at it, and goodness knows where they are in that area.
Green fields.
You want those?
Oh, I mean, the open space, isn't it?
It's all right. That's not scale, but I'll get it here. It's all right, Burton Brother. We just need to know what scale it is first.
Anybody else want to comment? Probably 1 to
Yeah, this is one of those where you have to weigh the two things. The heritage of the Grade 1 Bridge Chapel, of which there are only 6 in the country, is just across the road. The bridge is important. But we're not starting from there. There's some awful buildings gone up in that area, City Point, and not to mention St Albans Way itself, which predates any of us, and I don't think any of us would agree to that nowadays. And the area's already got into a state where what is there at the moment is an eyesore, and that is doing nothing for the heritage of the area. I was a bit surprised that we're talking about having spent all these millions of public money on Ocor, that we're actually talking about what happens when that breaches, because I've not heard that before, and I would have thought we should make damn sure that it's built so that it doesn't get breached. But nonetheless, any building that goes there should be capable of dealing with a flood by whatever it puts on the ground floor, and this seems to have got it. I think, quite honestly, this has been going on an awful long time. I remember it coming to CAC, I think 2-3 years ago now, and the architect clearly has toned it down, done lots of compromises, and I think now is the time to let it go through.
Thank you, Councillor Wood. Councillor Harwood. Hang on a minute, we've got the dimensions.
We can come back now for Councillor Hassel. We've measured the height from ground level up to the top of the roof parapet is 16 metres height for a 5-storey building.
Are you wiser or none the wiser, Councillor Hassel?
It would be nice to have context of the buildings around it, that's all, particularly from the artist's impressions. There's no real context of how it is in relation to them.
It'd have been nicer to be at home at 8 o'clock, but we can't have everything. Anybody else? Sorry, Councillor Harwood and then Councillor Potter.
Yeah, on page 90 there's a comment made about the flood risk to plant rooms. Will that be conditioned, because I can't find it in the conditions? On page 90 it says to protect vital service, plant rooms should be made water resistant or moved to upper floors. Can that be made a condition if it's not already been made? Okay. And one other thing, coming back to Glenford Towers disaster, The fact that I think I was told that we can't insist on them installing sprinklers, I think they should be made advisory, that would be. We don't want the council to have to foot the bill if something horrible happens and say we want money from elsewhere. So can we make that, or advise them of that? Okay, thank you.
I can confirm the flood resilience measures are included in condition 13. It says details and measures to protect statutory services from risk of flooding, which includes electricity, water, gas. So that relates to the plant room, which is in the building. In terms of fire safety, I mean, we can put an informative note on in regard to that. It is normally...
Can we make sure that perhaps in brackets plant rooms, please?
You can, yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Are you happy, Frank? I can't be doing it without you not being happy. Councillor Potter.
Thank you, Chair. On page 85, under the recommendation, it says, the main concern that I have about the current proposal is the dark core 10 material cladding proposed to be used at high level, which might visually make this building seem larger. Obviously, with what's happened in this country with cladding, are we sure that the cladding being used is totally fire resistant?
I mean, what I would say is the materials, which includes the cladding, will be conditioned. So it may be that precise type of cladding material may be something different, bearing in mind the Conservation Officer's comments. Obviously, nowadays, fire safety is more important in terms of cladding. We look at the planning merits, but I'm sure it's something that we will consider and the developers can consider when we agree the cladding that is incorporated onto the building.
Thank you. If I can just reply, I think it's not a case of may. I think we've got to really make sure this is an important, we've got to really say to the developers, this has got to happen without any doubt.
Yeah, in response to that, Councillor Potter, I mean, it is dealt with separately under the building regulations. We know all about that with how building regulations are interpreted, but we will make sure that the informative note states that we will expect sprinklers to be installed, and it is a local developer, and I'm aware that it's a single landowner, so we'll impress that point, but obviously we can't step beyond the realms of the planning system in terms of straying into building regulations. That would be ultra vires, but we can strongly make that point on the informative note, that they're aware of that, and as a corporate requirement, we'll insist that they need to positively respond and look at the building regulations very carefully.
Anybody else? Somebody like to move to the vote? Yeah. All those in favour? Recommendation? Okay. No, it would be very inappropriate this time of the night. Next one is 230 Derby Road, pages 116 to 122.
Sorry, Chair, it's off. Sorry, I forgot to mention that. It's been taken off the agenda.
Okay, Ian's had a long night. He said it's been taken off the agenda.
Sorry, I forgot to mention that, Chair. It was originally we thought it had been called in by an elected member. They since confirmed today that they didn't insist on it, so constitutionally we are bound to deal with it under delegated powers, just to be fair to everybody. So, apologies for not... I'm hoping not.
There's only about 50 of them. Okay, then we'll move to 1 to 3 and 5 Cowley Street, pages 123 to 131.
Not a great deal to add to the report, thank you, Chair. No updates. It's residential property with the number 1 being a little general store that wraps around Watson Street and Cowley Street. The proposal is to convert to a house in multiple occupation, so there'd be 11 bedrooms on ground and first floors, and the current arrangement based on the existing plans is there's around 9 bedrooms in the combination of those properties. So we feel that it's a relatively small intensification of use. There are obviously concerns by neighbours in terms of the nature of on-street parking, movement, general activity, disturbance, etc. But we feel that in the context and the existing situation that the proposal is reasonable. So I'll just move to the Speaker's chair. Thank you.
Thank you, Ian. We have two speakers. Can we have Mr. Clasby first? Good evening, Mr. Clasby. 3 minutes.
Let me switch this on. Thank you, Chair. Thank you, officers and members. I'm here speaking on behalf of a local residents group that has been formed in and around the Cowley Street area. It's called the Victoria Streets. We actually know the applicant really well. We, in some senses, don't have a significant objection to this application. What we do want to do, though, is object to some of the descriptions in the officer's report. We do feel that this is going to have a significant impact in the local area. It is going to have an impact on parking. It's going to have an impact on litter. It's going to have an impact on particularly noise and antisocial behaviour. And the reason is because of critical mass. Basically, I've lived in the area for 30 years, and we've seen slow but gradual change in the area. And the problem has come down to the fact that we want to keep it as a mixed community. And the difficulty is it's moving away from being a balanced mixed community towards just a particular type of area. So a while back, planning permission was granted to the Victoria Hotel, which is what our group is named after. Some of you may know the Victoria Hotel. It used to be a really great pub at the end of Cowley Street. Now, when that planning permission was granted, we're having to go back to the planning team because they haven't met some of the conditions over the patio at the back. But I personally have had to be out a number of times asking the residents of the Victoria Hotel to show consideration to the local community in terms of noise, in terms of parking, in terms of vomiting competitions. Okay, so these sorts of things are making it a less desirable place for people to want to live. And to be honest, some people are looking and increasingly looking to move out. Now, we do have a number of thoughts and suggestions. These may not be completely appropriate here, but we would like them to be taken under consideration. For example, Nottingham has Article 4 directions, which actually means that all houses that wish to be changed into houses of multi-occupancy actually have to go to planning. So that would mean a 3-bedroom house that wants to increase and go to a house of multi-occupancy has to actually go through the planning process. This would allow the council to monitor how things are changing within different communities. We would also like to look at maybe, and this may not come under your jurisdiction, the contracts that the actual people are signing when they actually take up residency, and we are discussing this with the applicants to ensure that they give an undertaking over their behaviour and their parking in that local community. This isn't just Cowley Street, this is across that whole area of the city. There are communities that are feeling under a huge amount of pressure. Thank you for your time.
Thank you, Mr. Clasby. Councillor Eldridge.
Thank you, Chair. Who'd want to follow Dave Clasby, eh? This is only the second time, Chair, that I've spoken at Planning Control Committee, and I think the first time was on the Victoria Hotel application on Cowley Street, which I opposed along with my fellow councillors and local residents. With that development, with that change of use, we absolutely thought, and local residents thought, that it would change the balance of the neighbourhood and would have a detrimental impact on that neighbourhood and local residents. And unfortunately, that has proven to be true for all the reasons that Dave has already highlighted, and I don't need to repeat. We are in the process of pursuing possible breaches to the conditions on that planning application. But I just think that, you know, although you may, in terms of the density of the residential area at 9 bedrooms versus 11 bedrooms, you're talking about 11 units, which potentially means you're talking about 11 cars. And as a local councillor, I spend a lot of my time in dialogue with local residents in that area who have real issues and concerns about parking, not just residents parking for the university as well, and adding a potentially another 11 cars into the mix would just, I think, force people over the edge. And as Dave said, we've reached a critical mass where the balance in that neighbourhood has gone too far away from residential and family households. That doesn't mean to say we're not anti-student by any shape, by any means, and actually we're doing a lot of work in the local community along with the Victoria Streets Association residents organisation to work with the university to promote better harmony between the residents, local residents and the student population, and we're in regular dialogue with the university on that. What it is about the change to a neighbourhood, the impact on a neighbourhood, and I think particularly the congestion and the extra parking, the extra vehicles that will be on those streets as a result of this development potentially. I am also not against developments as such, but I think they do need to be in keeping with the neighbourhood, and I do think we need to respect the balance of this neighbourhood in particular and this community. And in terms of the antisocial behaviour, one of my children, as everybody knows, is at school, very close to this area, and I've had local residents come up to me on the school gates and tell me that their children have been essentially falling asleep in class, people who live on Cowley Street, because the noise and the disruption and the parties and the antisocial behaviour has been so bad that those children have been woken up at night and therefore unable to concentrate in class the next day. And so I think we do need to think about that in these areas. These are residential areas where our children are growing up and going to school, and we need them to be able to go to school fit and fighting fit and able to learn. And if they're not able to do that, to me, that's a problem, and we need to do something about that. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Aldrich.
No, just to say I appreciate what Mr Clasby said about some of the approaches that other authorities have taken, and it's a wider issue to look at and to move through the Part 2 local plan process. But there's also, as Councillor Aldrich indicated, issues relating to relationships with the university and management and other things aside from the current planning arrangements or the application we're looking at now, a wider discussion about how people do behave, but that in terms of the scope of this application, we feel that given the nature of the combined building, that to increase the number of units by effectively, or bed spaces by effectively two places, and given the nature of the location of the site, it would be very difficult to defend, and I don't think we could resist at appeal any refusal of this application, but obviously conscious of the wider feeling in the community, and that's something I can pursue with colleagues.
Thank you, Ian. Councillor Wood.
Very specifically on that Article 4 idea, 2 full council meetings ago, there was a motion which was defeated, I think, by 49-2, proposing that the City Council adopt the procedure that has been done, certainly by Charnwood, I don't know about Nottingham, of having Article 4s on multiple HMOs. So that is the settled view of this City Council, that we do not go down that road. For what is a proposal here for one HMO, yet it's again, isn't it, saying there's those sort of people and there's these sort of people. We live in an area which we don't want to change. Well, sorry, the area has changed. We have a university very near there, and that has changed the area. People die, people move on, areas change. People have more cars than they used to. That makes a change. Things move. And I don't think there's any reason that we could possibly bring that would be sustainable at appeal for turning this down. I do understand why a local councillor has to speak up for the local residents, and I think she did a very good job at it. But quite honestly, there's no possible reason why we could turn this down.
Thank you, Councillor Wood. Councillor Evans.
Yeah, I'd just like to say, relating to what Robin stated, I was one of the two councillors at the meeting where we wanted to stop these developments of HMOs, and the other was the other UKIP councillor, Alan Graves. And I feel very strongly about this. I know areas have to change, and I know you can't stay static, but when we've got areas of terraced houses and places like that, traditionally families, to convert them to HMOs, I know this already is, so it's slightly different, it is really totally changing the infrastructure of the area that won't suit it. If you've got many people moving in, we've mentioned the car parking already, that's only one aspect of it. And I see this in Ulverston, and it's starting to creep in. So I'm opposed to converting traditional old small terraced houses into these HMOs. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Evans. Anybody else? Move to the vote. All those in favour of the recommendation? Anybody against? Okay, that's carried 10-1. Right, we're coming to the exciting part of the evening now with potential future site visits.
These are all quite small, I would hasten to add. This is just a widening of the existing cycle path in through Ulverston Park. No, that was it. Carry on. That's it. This is on the Leylands Estate Conservation Area, replacement of a boiler house and maintenance building with a 2.5-storey, 12 retirement flats. Move on. No interest. And this one is literally a replacement of Cavendish Infant School from their existing buildings to a new purpose-built building, which has been done on other school sites within the city. So, don't mind me. I won't get offended.
The final item on here, Ian's going to explain to us, is about the member training.
Yeah, I do apologise to members that in years gone by we've had a special members training event, and we were talking about another format earlier in the year, and Mr Teasdale keeps prodding me to say, you know, you need to do the members training. And what the idea was that we would have topic-based areas of training, because there were certain topics such as heritage impact, flooding, land drainage, highways issues that we would address during the course of the year, and with one thing and another the programme has slipped somewhat. So a suggestion was for next month, when there is no meeting, we would just have an overview session, probably myself and Paul, and just for refresher training, it would be something based on what Hugh Richards has presented before us to the basic scope of planning control members. Do something like that on a to be agreed date. So I'll probably leave that, if it's okay with members, to talk about a date possibly in the middle of next month and agree it with the chair and vice chair, or whenever suitable, or members. So that was the plan in terms of the first objective, and then beyond that, into next year would be to do specific topic area presentations with specific officers, just to break it up and have more bite-sized, as it were, training sessions. So if you'd like me to agree some date with the chair and vice chair and see what takers we've got for that. And so apologies for the delay in that. Thank you.
All that remains from me is to say it's good night from him and it's good night from me.